Good afternoon, everybody. It is Saturday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, digital sports producer for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined once again by Brian Batko for our weekly Steelers mock draft video. Brian, how are you?
I'm doing well, Adam. How are you? Other than I know you're just saying that the weather here is not really doing you that well, but I hope you're at least enjoying your inside time.
Yeah, I was telling Brian before we started recording, I'm dog sitting this week and it's raining, and every time we dog sit, it rains, and I can't take the dog out on the trail. So it's a little bit of a bummer, but
I mean, you could if you were willing to just throw on a raincoat and suck it up, right?
Yeah, I'm willing. I don't know.
I was going to say
my partner would be willing.
Yeah, but the dog wouldn't care, right?
Oh no, I think he cares very much. So
okay.
Unfortunately, yeah. So we got to at least wait till things dry up a little bit. But in the meantime, we got a lot of good football talk, Brian. The NFL Combine is officially in the books. We're about midway through last week when we did this video, but now we pretty much know everything we're going to know about the prospects at the Combine.
And pro days, more data points from the pro days, but yeah, at this point, the hay is pretty much in the barn.
Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit about how things, how the Combine shook things up. For me, the headline, Brian, was the cornerbacks that we've talked about for weeks and weeks on this, this YouTube video series, whatever you want to call it. Joey Porter Jr., Christian Gonzalez, Devin Witherspoon. Not a single one of them appeared going to the Steelers in a mock draft this past week that we tracked. This doesn't mean there's not something somewhere that connected one of those guys, but the things that I looked at for the first time in draft season did not have one of those guys going to the Steelers. Are they getting out of the Steelers' range at this point? Is it going to take some shake up during the pro days to change that?
I don't know about that, but it just seems like the draft analyst community has kind of crystallized to some extent on that top three and where they're going to go, which, as you just said, I mean, you've got a lot of time to be inside poring over the mock since it's rainy, and you're not finding much success as far as one of those three slipping to 17 and Pittsburgh. And if it is, generally from what I've come across myself, it would be Joey Porter Jr. But I think the fact that, Witherspoon didn't do anything at the Combine, so he didn't hurt himself. And Gonzalez and Porter, all they did in Indy was kind of further entrench themselves in that upper echelon of corners. So, yeah, I mean, it certainly wouldn't surprise me if all three of them are gone in the first, say, 15 picks. I think a lot of teams in today's NFL think you can't have enough good corners, especially all different types of corners, different sizes, different skill sets. We're going to parse through some of those, different categories and varieties later on in this show. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of the way that it's looking at this point. It is still fairly early, just under 50 days to go until the draft. So close yet so far away, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, the fact that none of them, and here's the funny thing about it, Adam, if any of them would have stunk it up at the Combine, then we'd be sitting here saying, do you really think the Steelers would still want this guy? So I'm never somebody who reacts too much one way or the other to what players do at the Combine. You went out and you ran a 4.4. That's great. You can probably see it on the film when you're chasing down a deep ball or running down a ball carrier. So it is just, it's a big part of the NFL offseason calendar to kind of confirm what we know. And in this case, it confirmed that those three have the goods.
Yeah, so I think at this point, that's not to say that they couldn't end up with the Steelers. Things happen, but teams value players differently than the mock draft community all the time. That's kind of what makes draft night so interesting, is that you think you know what's going to happen, and things sometimes go a different way. But in the meantime, I think the name I want to talk about is maybe replacing Joey Porter as that most mocked cornerback to the Steelers is someone we didn't talk about at all until last week, and that's Deonte Banks, the Maryland cornerback. He appeared in a mock draft we tracked for the first time last week. This week he was in 3, including Ray Fittipaldo's 7-round mock draft, which we're going to get into in a little more depth later on. But Ray had them taking him at number 32. I saw 2 mocks of them taking him at number 17. Every mock I looked at this week had him as a pretty much consensus first-round pick. I think one had him as high as, I think, like 11 or 12 or 13, somewhere in that range. and the lowest I saw him going was 23. So is that a guy whose star we really need to be watching? Because not only is there that Steelers connection via Mike Tomlin and the Maryland program. His son obviously went there. He's close friends with Mike Locksley, the coach. But is this just a good football player that we need to be paying attention to as maybe in that next wave of cornerbacks?
Yeah, he's in that next wave, and maybe he's even at the top. Personally, I would have him a little bit below Keely Ringo, and I think Ringo from Georgia is actually closer to tier 1 than he is to tier 2. But with Banks, I mean, there's a lot to like. I mean, his looking at his NFL Combine profile, now that he did everything he did, he's their top-rated corner in terms of pure athleticism score. And we know over the years, the Steelers are big into that, whether it's the SPARK grading system or RAS, relative athletic score. They really like guys who have the traits, because I think, as we said last week or maybe the week before, Mike Tomlin's big on coaching them up once you get that ball of clay. But when I look at the corner position specifically, that's essentially the needle that they tried to thread with Artie Burns, and it went so poorly with Banks. I mean, he's 6 foot 197. You love the 4.35 speed, the 42 vertical jump. All of that is great, but he doesn't have a ton of impressive film from his years at Maryland. I mean, he's more of a raw player, I think, than the other guys in this class. But it would be a big swing for me, just a little too big of a swing at 17. When you talk about Ray's mock, where he's going to the Steelers with that second round pick, then it's a lot more palatable, because I feel like, okay, I'm taking someone who's got all the tools that we want, and we think we can develop him. But if it doesn't work out, it's not a botched first round pick. It was a risk worth taking at that point for potentially a high reward.
Yeah, I think we're going to talk about the Artie Burns pick forever, because it did, it really does shape how you look at the cornerback situation, because not only did the Steelers not get the guy, but it felt like they reached because they wanted someone else. And you wonder is that history possibly repeating itself with Banks? If he's not one of those top 3 guys, or is this a situation we need to think of separately? I think the only thing I'd say to that is the fact that other mock drafts have him going in a similar range to where the Steelers are picking, not just to the Steelers, I would say gives me a little more faith than the Steelers are not going to end up in an Artie Burns situation. But does that mean that he's going to work out the way that you'd want him to with that kind of draft capital? No, I think you could be better than Artie Burns and still be a little bit of a disappointment for the Steelers if they went that way.
Yeah, I mean, he missed almost all of the 2021 season due to an injury, and he bounced back to have a good enough junior year that he declared for the draft, of course. As we mentioned last week, not a ton of interceptions on his resume, but I mean, he's kind of in the middle, I think, when we talk about a lot of these corners in this draft class. You've got the bigger physical guys like Porter, like Gonzalez, like Ringo. Then you've got the smaller types who have really good ball skills and are feisty and competitive, but might always be a little bit limited because of their size. Emmanuel Forbes, Clark Phillips. So Banks is kind of in the middle of that group. Depending on your perspective, that's either great or that's kind of the worst of both worlds. So I mean, it seems like with him, you'd definitely be projecting a little, and you'd have to be very confident in your coaching staff to get the best out of him and make sure that he reaches his full potential that he has with all that athleticism in him.
Brian, I think you set me up well there. I was just checking real quick to see which mock draft did it, but Emmanuel Forbes was the pick in Todd McShay's mock draft that was released this week. He is very fast. He's got solid size in terms of his height. He's 6'2", but he's only 166 pounds, so he's kind of a lightweight. I wonder if the Steelers, that makes sense for the Steelers, because he's got those ball skills you're talking about, right? He generated a ton of turnovers, ton of interceptions. He did things that even a guy like Porter Jr. didn't necessarily do at Penn State, which is prove himself as a playmaker and not just a good coverage guy. So my question for you is that a guy that the Steelers need, or do you have concern of the fact that they already have a lot of guys who may fit that mold, who are Good instinctually, pretty fast and quick, but not physical enough to go up against like A.J. Brown. Remember what he did to the Steelers, I believe in October, just kind of manned up on them and dominated them physically. Do the Steelers need to find that physical guy either in free agency or the draft? And if they don't, does a guy like Forbes make sense at 17?
Yeah, it was surprising to see him check in at 6'1", because I think even Mississippi State only listed him at maybe 6 foot. I guess he's somebody who plays smaller because he is so slight. And, I worry with him, sort of similar to Banks. Are you reaching at 17th overall for a guy who might be more of a number 2 corner in the NFL? I just think that with what the Steelers have currently, what they need on their roster, Cam Sutton and Levi Wallace, at least to me, are more finesse corners than a big, contested catch, go up and fight with A.J. Brown in the air, or, go up and fight with T. Higgins for a jump ball. I don't think they necessarily have that guy. So I'm not sure that's going to be Forbes either. But I think at 32, obviously, you like anybody more 15 picks lower. I'd be all for it at that point, because once you get into the second round, you've got somebody with the I think FBS record for pick sixes in a season, and just all that history of ball production. I'd be fine with that, but I think you might be forcing it a little bit with your position of need if you take them in the first round, because again, I think some of those physical aspects that he really can't change. I mean, your frame is your frame, your body is your body. That might cap his potential a little bit.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if the Steelers do go out and get someone a little more physical in free agency. Does that raise the possibility that would be a good fit for their defense? I think so. I think that's one of the things I want to see in free agency is what do they do with that cornerback situation? Because we spend so much time talking about it. If they address it in free agency, I think that could really change the paradigm in terms of the type of player the Steelers might be looking for. Brian, you also mentioned Keely Ringo a little bit earlier. I keep seeing, one or two mocks a week, especially when you get into those multi-round mock drafts. Luke Easterling for weeks has connected him to the Steelers with that number 32 pick. And I got to tell you, I really love that as if the Steelers could get Ringo at 32, address another need at 17, and get another good, solid player at the bottom of the second round. Ringo, basically what I'm trying to say is, as a guy that I'm looking at as someone who could really make a draft class for you, because I think he has all the upside of a first-round pick, but he does have, the age and some concerns about, that's why he might fall. But I look at him as like possibly a real – we've talked about this 32nd pick is basically a first-round pick. I think he's the type of guy who could make that be true.
Yeah, and that's also when you get into sort of what we touched on last week, this idea of the Steelers finding 3 starters in their first 3 picks this year, and that's what you're shooting to do. And even Kevin Colbert has always said, philosophically, the organization has felt that if you're even a third-round pick, you should become a starter eventually. That's what they expect of you. That's kind of what they are looking at with their grades on those players. So in this case, I would think that would be a home run for the Steelers to get him there. And Ringo, because a lot of the things I just mentioned, I think would entice me even at 17 if that big 3 are gone. The size and the athleticism for him, the fact that he did it, for that defense in the SEC, I guess that's kind of a double-edged sword. You're blowing out teams so often at Georgia, you're not necessarily getting stressed as much as a corner as you would maybe in some other leagues or in some different programs. Me, I look at it as more of a positive, how good you have to be to get on the field in that defense, the type of coaching and development that you get from Kirby Smart and his staff, and just the big games that you've played in and the plays that you've made in those games if you're Ringo. So we know that the Steelers have not only not shied away from, but they've actually run to players who come from these dominant programs. Najee Harris a couple years ago, George Pickens last season. I think if anything, they prefer the types who come from NFL light football, whether it's schematically or in terms of the competition. So Ringo, I would assume, is going to be pretty high on their board, and at 6'2", 207. Once again, I'll say it, that's a piece that you don't really have on your defense. And if you're the Steelers, you really haven't had in a long time at outside corner.
Brian, we've been talking about guys whose stock has risen since the combine. A guy whose stock has fallen off a little bit is Myles Murphy from Clemson, the edge rusher. There was a mock draft this week that connected him to the Steelers at number 17. He's still pretty much, kind of a consensus first rounder, but he's not going in those top 15 picks like he was before the combine. I know you're suspect of the Steelers addressing edge rusher with that pick. Given what they already have in house, and it's like you said, you want them to get a starter with that number 17 pick. But is Murphy a guy who has potential to be maybe best player available at number 17 if he does drop the way he has in the mocks?
He's kind of in that bucket with Lucas Van Ness and Keon White for me. A lot to like in terms of the physical makeup, but again, I mean, the reasons I wouldn't do it, I feel like you're getting an overlapping piece to some extent there with what you already have. You drafted a tweener edge D lineman last year in the 3rd round in DeMarvin Leal, who, he's a 3rd rounder, but people forget. I mean, he was looked at as a 1st round type of talent the season before, and then just didn't have a great year at Texas A&M in 2021. Had an off-field incident that maybe raised some red flags for teams. So he falls to the 3rd round, and the Steelers grab him there. Give the guy a chance to see what he can become. He's the 2nd youngest player on the team behind George Pickens. Don't draft over him already. And I know you can play more than one hybrid pass rusher at a time, but you have Cam Hayward. You have, I don't know what's going to become of Isaiah Loudermilk. Maybe you just throw him out of this discussion entirely, based on talent compared to a potential 1st round pick. But Myles Murphy doesn't really do it for me coming out of Clemson. If I'm going D-line in the 1st round, I want somebody who is powerful enough to line up inside and kind of play it more the way that, a Tyson Alualu when he was right, or Javon Hargrave before that could play it, being the nose when you do go to the 3-4 against the likes of the Browns and the Ravens, but also being able to line up next to Cam Hayward in the nickel, in the dime, and get after quarterbacks.
Brian, why do you think we see this continued national steam toward an edge rusher? I wouldn't say it's dominant. I'd still say most mock drafts are still tying corners to the Steelers, but to the extent that there's a second tier, there's definitely a big group of edge rushers we've talked about, that have been mocked to the Steelers from the national perspective. What do you think's behind that?
Because they are generally considered to be the best values defensively in any draft. I mean, a lot of people will tell you teams look at a quarterback, big drop off, and then the people who protect him and the people who rush him. So that's why I think you see that. I don't even really believe personally that it's a Steelers specific thing. I think it's more of, Joe Schmo's putting together his 1st round board coming out of the combine. He gets to 17. He sees guys like Keon White, Lucas Van Ness, Myles Murphy still not slotted anywhere. Probably sees the Steelers roster and thinks their whole O-line's coming back. They've got starters back at corner. They don't really have any obvious holes. They should take the best player available. And again, in terms of draft value, a lot of people subscribe to the theory that edge rushers are right up there below quarterback. So that to me is where it comes from, rather than people thinking that the Steelers need to replace a TJ Watt or Alex Highsmith anytime soon. And I also don't know. I mean, I think you've got to be one of the more sharp analysts to know kind of what the Steelers do schematically, defensively, because it's difficult to have a feel for that for all 32 teams. And their outside linebacker, the way those guys play, is kind of a unique deal in the NFL with what's asked of them, and they need to find unique prospects. I think all these guys that we're mentioning now, they're not true outside linebackers. They are hybrid types who are going to line up as that 5 technique with their hand in the dirt.
Brian, one guy who does have the versatility that I think you value along the defensive line is Calijah Kancey from close to home at Pitt. Finally, I saw I've been looking for an opportunity to talk about him, but I have. Let me look up which mock it was. It was Chris Trapasso from CBS who finally connected him to the Steelers. What do you think of him coming to the Steelers at number 17? Obviously, he's got some pass rushing in his background. I think he had 7.5 sacks at Pitt this past year, but he also Was solid against the run, had a lot of tackles for loss. But he is undersized too. So what do you think about him at 17 or maybe later?
I think Calijah Kancey can be a really good NFL player in the right fit for him. So maybe a 4-3 when he can be that attacking, penetrating interior defensive lineman with some big jokers around him taking up blocks. That's where I think he will find the most success. I don't know that he's the best scheme fit for the Steelers and what they need on their defensive line. Now, I say that acknowledging that football has largely become positionless on the defensive side, especially Aaron Donald had many of these same kind of concerns tailing him into that, was it 2013 draft, whatever it was. And you look at what he's doing. He could play for any team. He could play in any front and probably be just fine. So that comparison is always going to be there with Cancey because of the school, because of the size, because of the production, which is a credit to him and everything he has done at Pitt, especially this past season. It's just not the type of D-line prospect I think the Steelers should be looking at. I think he could have a great NFL career, and the fact that he crushed it at the Combine is only going to help him even more. So wouldn't be surprised to see him play himself into the to see him put himself into the first round conversation with the way he played, the film that he's got, and now the athletic testing to back it up. But I just ultimately think it'd be elsewhere.
See, let me ask, I just want to pull at this thread a little bit because you mentioned Javon Hargrave earlier, and Trapasso says Cancey as the Javon Hargrave replacement the Steelers have missed the past few seasons. So he's tying a direct line, but you don't see Cancey as that type of player is what you're suggesting here?
No, I don't. I mean, I think Hargrave had a much wider body. I think he was much closer to a typical nose tackle. I mean, he's listed now at 6'2", 305. I don't know what he was when the Steelers drafted him, but Cancey's 6 foot 280. I mean, he was 6'1" at the Combine. That was a big deal for him that he kind of got that extra inch there. A lot of people thought he would be 6 foot on the nose. So 6'1", 281 for Cancey in Indy. I mean, maybe that doesn't seem like much of a difference, but from being around Hargrave in the Steelers locker room and from kind of passing by Cancey on the south side, I think Hargrave's just a much naturally bigger body, a bigger boned guy. He was known for his rear end having its own zip code when he was here, and the Steelers, they liked the versatility that his physical build, but also his athletic traits gave him. I think, Cancey could certainly be just as good of a pro, I think, as Hargrave, but I just don't think he's that similar of a player.
Brian, the other big mock draft this week was Ray Fittipaldo's second 7-round mock draft for the Steelers. So he went, not just the first pick, not just the first 3 picks, but he went all the way down. The first 3 picks were Broderick Jones, then Deonte Banks, who we talked about earlier, and then finally Siaki Ika, a name that does keep coming up for the Steelers, usually about once a week in my tracking of the mock drafts. What did you think of that top 3? And was there anyone else that Ray named, especially toward the bottom, that caught your eye a little bit?
Well, yeah, I mean, Holy Cross offensive line legend Ray Fittipaldo was always going to have the Steelers taking a lineman in the first round. At some point, that train's never late. We don't know if Broderick Jones will make it to the finish line for Ray's mocks, but that makes a lot of sense. Beyond Ray's own inclinations to beef up the line of scrimmage. Jones, I would like him, even though I don't necessarily think O-line is the way I'd go in the first round. The nice thing about him is I think he's athletic, powerful, versatile enough that he could probably even play guard for you at the next level if it turns out that you got an injury or that's where you end up needing him to start. Maybe he can do it a little bit better than, say, a Dan Moore, who you feel comfortable enough for now, at least at left tackle. So Jones would be a good pick. I wouldn't hammer it. That's the kind of circular logic that we always arrive at this point of the draft process. Is you're picking 17th, you're probably going to get a pretty good player that doesn't have a ton of flaws and holes for us to, you're almost being intellectually dishonest at that point to rip apart a selection or a prospect. So Jones would be just fine. And then I really liked Ray's other picks from there. If anything, I think that, he might be selling those guys short of what their stock's going to be. Siaki Ika will be an interesting prospect for teams to evaluate because he is that traditional two-gapping nose tackle. I mean, there will be worries about his stamina. Can he get after the passer at this level? Can he even kind of contain against some of these more sophisticated rushing attacks that you're seeing nowadays in football, or a team's just going to whiz right past him on jet sweeps? So all of that being said, I like the player. I like the character that he seems to have. I mean, he played at LSU and Baylor, so he's seen a lot of different things. He actually, fun fact, went to the same high school as Jaylen Warren. So those two are friends and know each other. So Ika would check a lot of boxes for me if you can get him 49th overall. Love to stick him in the middle of that defense when you play teams in your division or elsewhere that just want to run it right at you. And if he gives you any kind of pass rushing juice on top of that, then that's just gravy. So, and we talked a lot about Ray's 32nd pick, Deonte Banks. I'm on record, Adam, as saying I'm good with him there, even if not at 17.
Yeah, I'll say this about Broderick Jones, and the reason I think I'm higher on the Steelers picking an offensive lineman than I think some other people are is that there's no one in that group right now that I see as a long-term fixture and someone that they can have for 10 years. A David DeCastro, Marquise Pouncey type. I look at Broderick Jones and that athletic package, and I say there's going to be a home for him somewhere. Whether or not there's an obvious place for him right now. So even if you don't get a ton of instant impact from him, I think he has potential to be here for a long time and be a regular Pro Bowl type guy. And we've seen that's when the Steelers are at their best, when they don't have to have 5 guys like that, but they got to have at least 1 or 2. For this team to succeed. So that's why I think I'm high on a guy like Broderick Jones. I don't want them to reach for a lineman, but I do, kind of love what he brings to the table if he's available at 17. Brian,
the other pick I like from Ray, I think 3rd round's a little soon. I would probably look at an edge rusher in the 4th round if I'm the Steelers, but KJ Henry from Clemson, who Ray mocked to them in the 3rd, if he were there in the 4th, I'd probably be all over that. He's another player who was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school. He was actually somebody who, when I was covering Pitt, it was kind of one of their pipe dreams was to get KJ Henry, who was one of the top-rated players in the country. I think it was a close family friend of his was the Pitt receivers coach at the time, Kevin Sherman. So he came up, visited, I think had him in his top 5, maybe even top 3. Generally, Clemson wins the recruiting battles for blue chip pass rushers. So that's ultimately what happened with KJ Henry. But he is somebody else who, he was a team captain, I think, for Clemson, just spoken very highly of and a leader for Dabo Swinney. So that's somebody to me. If he can be your number 3 rotational pass rusher behind TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith, I would sign on for that early day 3.
Brian, free agency starts next week on the 15th. So, probably before the next time we talk, what is the one move you can imagine the Steelers make? Because obviously we could say, oh, yeah, go sign the best 5 players in free agency. Let's talk in the realm of realism here. What's the move that they could make in free agency that you think would shake up, the draft logic we've been talking about for the past couple of months when free agency opens next week?
I have been doing all of my draft capitulating the right word?
I think capitulating means surrender, but
what's the word I'm looking for?
Speculation. I don't
hypothesizing.
know. There we go. That's a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah, I've been doing all my draft hypothesizing with the idea in mind that Cam Sutton is going to come back. So I kind of have that already in my pocket when I'm talking about needs at corner and elsewhere on the defense. To me, I think the big one would be if they address defensive line in a major way, whether that is re-signing Larry Ogunjobi or going out and getting another veteran who can play an Ogunjobi-like role for them, then I'm not as gung-ho about the idea of using that 1st-round pick on an interior lineman. I thought Ogunjobi was pretty good last year. I'm not sold on him coming back because I don't know that the Steelers are sold on him health-wise. But beyond that, I guess, safety, inside linebacker, it could go either way. You can argue those draft needs, even if they do quickly move on a Terrell Edmonds or Robert Spillane or somebody like that. I'd start with that D-line puzzle there, depending on what they do, could kind of shape what I think they should do at the top, and then from there on out.
All right, well, that's going to be something to watch. Brian, thanks for joining me this week. I hope you all enjoyed everything we talked about, and we'll be back next week. Please stay tuned to the channel. We're going to have a lot more football talk, obviously, but also some selections Sunday. I think we might be trying to do a live stream to see what happens with Pitt and Penn State, even West Virginia. Yeah, so I think there's going to be a lot of reacting to, first, where do the teams end up, and then what are the matchups. So I think we're going to try to do that for the college hoops. Obviously, we've got some Pirates in Bradenton. We've got a lot going on with the Pens. A lot of people, wailing and gnashing of teeth as they continue to just kind of duff around in the middle of the pack here. So lots to talk about. So please stay tuned. Please subscribe to the channel. Please like this video. Help us out with the YouTube algorithm if you enjoyed what you saw. And please subscribe to the subscription deal down at the description. $6 for 6 months of access to postgazette.com. Everything I'm writing, everything Brian's writing. Everything.
The word I was looking for, Adam, was cogitate, by the way.
Cogitate? I would never have come up with that. We would have sat here for 5 minutes.
Yeah, I'm going to go study the dictionary before the next show.
Yeah, we always got to get better, Brian. So we're just like draft prospects.
1% better every day, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us, everybody. We'll try to do better the next time, and take care.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it on Apple Podcasts, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down in the description.